From the very first drive, something felt wrong. So wrong that even the most loyal fans in the stadium sensed an invisible weight dragging the offense into the ground. Dillon Gabriel looked nothing like the steady, reliable quarterback the coaching staff had been defending for months. Instead, he appeared rattled from the opening snap, hesitating on simple reads, holding the ball far too long, and delivering passes that arrived late enough for defenders to practically walk into the throwing lanes. Teammates try to stay composed during those moments. Everyone understands off days happen, but this wasn't just a slow start. This was a meltdown happening in real time, and every snap made it clearer. Receivers broke off routes with wide-open arms, only to watch the ball sail behind them or bounce at their feet. Some stood completely still after plays, hands on hips, eyes burning with the kind of disbelief players usually hide. The sideline, normally buzzing with communication and quick fixes, turned eerily quiet. Offensive coaches paced nervously, but refused to acknowledge the disaster unfolding right in front of them. Meanwhile, defensive players jogged off the field after stop, only to collapse on the bench in visible frustration. They weren't angry at Gabriel. Players rarely aim their frustration at one teammate, but the exhaustion was obvious. They knew they were carrying the entire team, possession after possession, while the offense moved like it was stuck in cement. What made the situation even more unnerving was how early the collapse started. The hesitation wasn't new. According to whispers around the facility, this pattern had shown up during preseason joint practices. But the coaching staff insisted it was all part of Gabriel's adjustment curve. Whatever that curve was supposed to produce, it definitely wasn't showing up on Sunday. Players on the sideline exchanged quiet glances that said everything words couldn't. This isn't working. Yet despite the mounting mistakes, the staff stuck to the script. No adjustments, no spark, no urgency. The decision to keep Gabriel in wasn't just puzzling, it felt like denial. And as the offense continued to sputter, confusion slowly turned to frustration, and frustration grew into something far more dangerous, doubt. That's what really rattled the locker room. Not the incompletions, not the sacks, the doubt. Between drives, even fans in the stadium began sensing the growing disconnect. The defense would force a turnover or a quick three-and-out, and hope would flicker for a moment in the crowd, only to vanish the second Gabriel lined up again behind center. Every stalled drive fed into the same unspoken question echoing across the field. Why aren't they making a change? But the most telling signs weren't in the box score. They were in the body language, the slumped shoulders, the lingering stares toward the sideline, the quiet conversations among veterans who rarely show emotion. It felt like everyone except the coaching staff understood what was happening. If you're enjoying this video and loving the content, don't forget to give us a big thumbs up. It really helps us know what you want to see more of. And why keep all the excitement to yourself? Share this video with your friends, family, or anyone who loves NFL drama. And as rough as this opening looked, the truth was even harsher. This was only the beginning of a much bigger fracture forming inside the Cleveland Browns. While the offense crumbled drive after drive, one figure on the sideline remained locked in with a level of focus that made the entire situation even more surreal. Shedeur stood just a few feet from the field, helmet strapped, gloves tightened, mentally firing through every possibility the defense could throw at him. He wasn't packing, shouting, or sulking. He was studying. Calmly, obsessively. Tablet in hand, eyes glued to coverages, scanning blitz packages, rewinding alignments, reevaluating protections the way starting quarterbacks do when they know they're moments away from entering the game. Except that moment never came. Players noticed it first. Every time the offense jogged off the field after yet another failed series, more and more teammates drifted toward Sanders. Not in a dramatic or rebellious way, but with the natural gravity that pulls competitors toward the person they trust to change a game. They watched him point out open windows, walk through timing concepts, and even trace out footwork adjustments with subtle hand motions. It wasn't loud. It wasn't performative. It was a quarterback, preparing as if his number was about to be called at any second. Gabriel, meanwhile, wandered the sideline with a blank expression, flanked by coaches who looked more like protective security guards than strategists. They quietly intercepted frustrated players, trying to shield Gabriel from the mounting pressure. The more the offense faltered, the tighter that coaching bubble became around him. It was hard to ignore. Some players lowered their heads, others exchanged tight-lipped glances. The message felt unmistakable. The staff was committed to the plan, no matter how bad the situation looked. Rumors around the league have suggested for months that Sanders carries an aura players gravitate toward, the kind of presence that doesn't need volume to command respect. Sunday made that rumor feel a lot less like speculation and a lot more like reality. Every time Sanders broke down another defensive look, heads leaned in. Players nodded. Minor corrections turned into quiet strategy sessions, happening between a quarterback who wasn't allowed to step onto the field and teammates desperate for solutions. And yet, the coaching staff barely acknowledged him. They didn't ask for input. They didn't consult him. They didn't even look in his direction during timeouts. It was as if acknowledging him would create a decision they didn't want to confront. The sideline tension thickened with every passing minute. Sanders wasn't warming up for a highlight moment. He was preparing out of pure instinct, refusing to let the chaos around him break his routine. That calm dedication only intensified the confusion building around the team. How was the quarterback showing the most preparation, the most poise, the most command, also the one who never touched the field? For players watching up close, it felt like witnessing the solution standing right in front of them, completely ignored. By the time the second quarter bled into the third, Cleveland's defense had already done everything a championship unit could possibly do to keep a broken offense alive. They forced punts with surgical precision, created turnovers that should have flipped momentum, and delivered red zone stops that would have energized any capable offense. But every time they handed the ball back, the same nightmare played out. The offense marched onto the field, sputtered through a few uninspired plays, and limped right back to the sideline. At first, the defense tried to disguise their frustration. Helmets stayed on, eyes stayed forward, but even the best poker faces eventually crack. By the middle of the third quarter, you could see the emotional wear and tear etched onto every defender's body language. Shoulders slumped deeper with each wasted opportunity. Veterans stood with hands on their hips, staring out onto the field as if searching for answers that the coaching staff refused to provide. Rumors later surfaced that one defensive captain finally reached his breaking point and confronted the offensive coordinator during a tense sideline exchange. According to multiple sources familiar with the moment, the captain didn't raise his voice, but the frustration behind his words was unmistakable. He questioned the logic, why the team continued sticking with a plan that clearly wasn't working, and why they refused to give Sanders even a single offensive series. The response he got, as one insider put it, felt like a brick wall. The coordinator allegedly referenced the organizational plan, the long-term development timeline, and other phrases that only deepened the disconnect between coaches and players. That's when the mood shifted. This wasn't about Gabriel missing throws anymore. This was about the defense realizing that no matter how hard they fought, they were trapped inside a losing formula created by stubborn leadership. The tension inside the huddle became impossible to ignore. Defensive backs stared off into the distance between plays. Linebackers muttered under their breath. Linemen shook their heads, frustrated that their dominance meant nothing if points couldn't follow. Several players later admitted privately that it felt like they were trying to drag the entire team uphill while the coaching staff kept pouring sand underneath their feet. They knew Sanders was ready. They saw him locked in. They watched him break down coverages with the kind of precision that gives teammates confidence. And the longer he stood untouched, the more ridiculous the situation seemed. It wasn't animosity toward Gabriel. Players understand when someone struggles. It was the refusal to adapt, the unwillingness to prioritize winning over a predetermined plan. Defensive leaders had sacrificed too many reps, too much energy, and too much pride to watch their efforts vanish because the staff wouldn't make the obvious move. By the end of the third quarter, the sideline atmosphere felt like a storm waiting to break. Everyone sensed something was coming, something big. The fourth quarter was supposed to be Cleveland's moment of redemption, the point in every gritty NFL game where the team that wants it more finally seizes control. And for one brief second, it looked like the Browns were about to do exactly that. The defense, running on fumes, came up with the kind of clutch takeaway that shifts an entire stadium's atmosphere. Helmets slapped, fists pumped, the crowd erupted, and even exhausted players found a sudden burst of energy as they sprinted off the field. On the sideline, Shedeur Sanders tightened his chin strap. This was the situation quarterbacks dream of, down by a few, momentum swinging, the entire stadium roaring for a spark. He had studied every coverage. He had memorized responses to every blitz. He was ready not just to enter the game, but to take over the game. Multiple teammates watched him stand up, expecting this to finally be the turning point. But then it happened. The coaching staff didn't even look at Sanders. Without hesitation, they signaled for Gabriel. The reaction on the sideline was instant and impossible to hide. A handful of players froze mid-step. Others turned away in disbelief. A veteran receiver dropped his helmet onto the bench with a quiet thud that carried more frustration than any shout could. For a team starving for a lifeline, the decision felt like pulling the plug. Gabriel jogged onto the field, and it wasn't confidence carrying him. It was obligation. Even from the stands, fans could feel the air shift. Momentum, that fragile force football depends on, evaporated completely. When the offense broke the huddle, the stadium's earlier roar turned into an uneasy silence, the kind where people brace themselves for something they've already accepted. What followed was painfully predictable. A mistimed read, a wasted down, a throw that never should have left his hand. Whatever faint spark the defense had fought to create died right there on the grass. Players knew it. Coaches knew it. Everyone watching understood a defining moment had just passed them by. After the eventual stall, one of many that afternoon, the offense trudged back to the sideline. Reportedly, that's when a pair of veteran linemen delivered a brutally honest message in the locker room after the game. "We didn't get beaten. We beat ourselves by refusing to play the guy who gave us the best chance." No shouting, no drama, just truth that had been simmering all season.
If you enjoyed today's breakdown and want to keep up with all the drama, trades, and behind-the-scenes action in the NFL, then don't forget to hit that like button.
And they weren't the only ones who felt it. According to several sources, this was the exact moment when frustration transformed into something heavier, resentment. Not toward Gabriel, toward the decision-making that kept Sanders chained to the sideline while the season slipped away one possession at a time. This wasn't just a bad call. It was a turning point, the kind that leaves scars inside a locker room. Long before Sunday's meltdown, long before the sideline stares and the fourth quarter disbelief, a quiet tension had been building beneath the surface, one that most fans never saw and the organization never wanted to acknowledge. According to people close to the team, this story didn't begin on game day. It began months earlier, hidden inside training camp, during the early morning practices when depth charts were supposedly open, and competition was advertised as fair. But rumors from inside the facility suggested otherwise. From the very first week of camp, Sanders reportedly outplayed expectations. Players described his command as instant, the kind of presence that turns heads even in simple walkthroughs. Every rep seemed sharp. Every read came fast. Every decision looked natural. And as camp progressed, the gap didn't shrink, it widened. Sanders' timing with receivers improved. His confidence grew. And his grasp of the offense strengthened so quickly that teammates privately wondered if the starting job might shift faster than anyone expected. Yet despite all that momentum, the depth chart barely budged. Meanwhile, Gabriel's training camp was filled with what coaches publicly brushed off as typical early adjustment bumps. But players who witnessed it firsthand saw something different. There were missed reads, forced throws, communication breakdowns, and uncertainty in moments where the offense needed clarity. Still, even as the patterns formed and the contrast between the quarterbacks became harder to ignore, the coaching staff stood firm on one unwavering message: Gabriel was the guy. No discussion. No deviation. That's when the first cracks formed inside the locker room. Veterans began to pick up on the inconsistency. Younger players whispered about it in position rooms. Even support staff, according to one source, noticed that Sanders' strong performances weren't translating into increased opportunities. It wasn't hostility, it was confusion. When competition doesn't align with results, frustration begins to grow. And when that frustration isn't addressed, suspicion follows. Insiders claim the tension hit a noticeable peak during a closed-door scrimmage when Sanders reportedly outperformed Gabriel so decisively that several players walked off the field expecting the coaching staff to reevaluate the depth chart. Instead, the following day, Gabriel took the same number of reps, the same install responsibilities, and the same starter treatment he'd received since day one. If any adjustments were made behind the scenes, they certainly weren't visible to the players. That was the moment many inside the building realized the competition might never have been a competition at all. According to people familiar with the situation, the organizational message was clear. Draft status, off-season investment, and coaching preference outweighed on-field performance. And while teams rarely say that out loud, players feel it immediately. It sends a ripple through the culture, a signal that merit isn't driving decisions. By the time week 1 arrived, Sanders already knew the battle wasn't about talent. It was about politics, and the players around him knew it too. So when Sunday rolled around and the offense unraveled, the frustration didn't appear out of thin air. It was the explosion of pressure that had been building for weeks. The sun hadn't even cleared the Cleveland skyline when the news detonated across the NFL. Kevin Stefanski was out, effective immediately. What began as whispers from overnight insiders exploded into a full-scale organizational earthquake by 7:00 a.m., sending analysts scrambling, fans refreshing their feeds, and players waking up to a completely restructured reality. Inside the Browns facility, Monday is usually routine: treatment, review sessions, then team meetings. But this Monday was anything but typical. Staff members walked in to see security stationed near the main hallway, front office assistants printing memos, and team operations moving with the urgency of a franchise in full crisis management mode. The tension was thick, not chaotic, but tightly controlled, like everyone was following a script that had been written long before anyone outside the building knew it existed. Players started arriving in waves, most still processing the viral fourth-quarter meltdown from the day before. Some weren't surprised. A few had predicted this would happen behind closed doors. Others looked genuinely stunned. Even veterans who had navigated multiple coaching changes before felt the weight of this one. Stefanski wasn't just a coach. He was a system, an identity, the architect of the Browns' most disciplined seasons in decades. Watching that pillar fall shook the building. Then came the moment that made it clear how serious things were: the emergency team meeting. No phones, no recording, no leaks, just the front office, the players, and raw truth. Sources inside said the meeting lasted nearly an hour. It wasn't angry, but it was direct. Executives didn't just explain what happened, they explained why. When certain phrases were mentioned: communication breakdown, loss of trust, inconsistent leadership, and failure to align with quarterback development strategy, players exchanged looks. They understood exactly who that was referring to: Shedeur Sanders. By mid-morning, the NFL world was on fire. Sports talk shows ran wall-to-wall segments dissecting every angle. Analysts theorized that the Browns were protecting their future investment in Sanders. Others argued that the previous afternoon's sideline chaos forced ownership's hand. Some speculated this move had been planned for weeks, and the collapse simply accelerated the timeline. Every channel had a narrative, none had the full story. Meanwhile, Shedeur himself stayed silent. No posts, no quotes, no cryptic messages. But sources said he arrived early, met privately with team officials, and then entered the locker room with a calmness that caught teammates off guard. It wasn't arrogant or celebratory, it was focused. Like he knew the window for the franchise to stabilize around him had just opened. The most telling moment, however, came when defensive leaders approached Sanders in the hallway. For weeks, underlying frustration had simmered, much of it tied to the belief that the offense wasn't being positioned to succeed. On Monday morning, instead of tension, there was acknowledgement, and more importantly, alignment. By lunchtime, one thing had become clear. This wasn't just a coaching change. It was the beginning of a franchise reset, triggered in a single, unforgettable morning. By midday, Cleveland wasn't just reacting, it was revolting. Fans flooded social media, sports radio, and comment threads with a chaotic mix of anger, relief, and utter disbelief. The city that had endured decades of heartbreak suddenly found itself in the center of the biggest storyline in sports, and every faction of the fan base had a different villain. Outside the team facility, a small crowd formed within hours. Some held signs demanding accountability. Others chanted their support for Shedeur Sanders, framing the firing as overdue. A few even shouted for a total organizational purge. Cleveland fans are passionate, loud, and fiercely loyal, and this Monday unleashed every bit of that intensity. Local radio hosts described the vibe as a full-scale emotional riot, a sentiment nobody bothered to dispute. Online, the reactions split into three camps. The first group called this a necessary reset, arguing that Stefanski's conservative play calling and questionable lineup decisions had held the team back. They pointed to weeks of frustration building under the surface, strange substitutions, stalled drives, and a growing disconnect between coaching decisions and on-field performance. For them, the firing wasn't shocking, it was inevitable. The second group was furious. They saw Stefanski as the stabilizer the franchise had long needed, and firing him mid-season felt like lighting a match in a room full of gasoline. These fans questioned whether the front office was caving to pressure, media narratives, or the growing star power around Shedeur Sanders. In their eyes, this wasn't decisive leadership, it was panic. The third group wasn't choosing sides at all. They were simply exhausted. Only the Browns could turn week into a national scandal, one fan wrote, echoing the fatigue that comes from living through countless front office shakeups. But the national media, they didn't just react, they exploded. Every major network cut into programming for emergency segments. ESPN deployed a full panel. FS1 ran breaking banners nonstop. Former coaches, ex-players, analysts, insiders, everyone had an opinion, and none of them were mild. Some framed Stefanski as a scapegoat, sacrificed to shield internal dysfunction. Others claimed Shedeur's development had been sabotaged by outdated schemes, inconsistent support, and philosophical misalignment with Stefanski's system. A few bold commentators even suggested the firing was the front office's way of declaring the franchise officially belonged to Sanders now. The story spread beyond sports. Morning shows covered it. Online news outlets picked it up. NFL insiders dropped cryptic posts hinting that the real story hadn't fully surfaced yet. The hashtag tied to the firing trended for hours, accumulating millions of impressions as fans and rivals alike chimed in. Then came the celebrity responses. Athletes, entertainers, influencers all weighed in. Some defended Sanders. Some blasted the Browns. Some joked that Cleveland was allergic to normalcy. What made everything spiral even faster was how suddenly the narrative shifted. Overnight, Shedeur had gone from a promising young quarterback trying to find his footing to the unwilling centerpiece of the biggest drama in football. And the world wasn't simply watching. It was dissecting every frame, every angle, every connection. The Browns weren't dealing with a local controversy anymore. They were navigating a national firestorm, and it was only getting hotter. The moment Kevin Stefanski's firing hit the national cycle, the NFL community didn't just react, it recalibrated. Within hours, league insiders were already discussing how this single decision could reshape coaching markets, quarterback development philosophies, and even front office strategies across multiple franchises. For rival teams, the message was unmistakable. The Browns had just declared an all-in, no excuses era around Shedeur Sanders. You don't fire a head coach mid-season unless ownership believes the window for a young quarterback's growth is narrowing fast. That signal rippled through front offices from the AFC North to the NFC West. The immediate question across the league was simple: who's next? Stefanski's exit created a domino effect, forcing teams with shaky coaching situations to reassess their timelines. Several franchises already on the edge, the Commanders, Saints, Patriots, Raiders, and Titans, suddenly faced intensified scrutiny. Analysts speculated that some owners might accelerate their own coaching changes before losing top candidates to Cleveland. Because in the coaching world, high-profile quarterback talent is a magnet, and Shedeur Sanders, for better or worse, had become the center of gravity. By mid-afternoon, lists were circulating. The Browns were linked to offensive-minded innovators, quarterback developers, and rising assistants who specialized in modern schemes. Names like Ben Johnson, Bobby Slowick, Todd Monken, and even college offensive gurus began trending. Every agent with a client in the coaching pipeline was on the phone, sensing opportunity. But the more intriguing fallout came from current head coaches. A few league insiders hinted that at least 2 established coaches, both under pressure, might quietly position themselves for the Cleveland job if their current seasons unraveled. That kind of speculation doesn't happen unless the league sees star potential in the quarterback at the center of the conversations. Meanwhile, Stefanski's firing reignited the long-running debate about organizational patience. Coaches around the league chimed in anonymously, expressing concern that the Browns had set a new precedent, one where a few weeks of misalignment with a franchise quarterback could end a multi-year tenure. Some thought it was inevitable. Others called it dangerous. Defensive coordinators, too, monitored events closely. If the Browns were going offense first in their next hire, it meant an opportunity, or a warning, for defensive minds who believed they were next in line for top jobs. League chatter indicated that several defensive assistants were frustrated with a growing trend, quarterbacks dictating coaching careers. But beneath all that noise, a more strategic shift was brewing across the NFL. Teams began revisiting their internal scouting on Sanders. If the Browns were willing to reorganize their entire structure around him, did they know something the league underestimated? Was Sanders a future franchise anchor hiding behind flawed play design? Front offices hate being blindsided, and Cleveland's move suggested they had seen enough talent to commit fully. Then there was Stefanski himself. He instantly became the hottest available coaching figure, and teams with uncertain futures were already circling. His calm demeanor, playoff experience, and ability to stabilize chaotic environments made him an immediate candidate for multiple upcoming openings. Some insiders even suspected that his next job could come sooner than most expected. By the end of the day, one truth had become impossible to ignore. Kevin Stefanski's firing didn't just shake the Browns, it shook the entire NFL ecosystem. And the league was already bracing for the aftershocks still to come. When the dust finally settles, when the headlines slow and the outrage softens into analysis, one indisputable truth will remain. The Cleveland Browns are standing at the most consequential crossroads of their modern era. Not because of a single loss, not because of a quarterback controversy, but because ownership, executives, and players are now forced to confront a decision that will determine the franchise's direction for years, if not a full decade. It comes down to this. Will the Browns fully commit to Shedeur Sanders as the face of the franchise, or will they slip back into the indecision, loyalty politics, and depth chart dogma that have sabotaged generations of Cleveland football? The stakes are enormous. Sanders isn't merely a promising young quarterback, he represents an organizational pivot. His leadership, preparation, and mental command have already earned the locker room's respect. Players have seen enough in practice, meetings, and tense sideline moments to believe he gives them the best chance to win. That belief is priceless in the NFL, rare, fragile, and easily destroyed if ignored. Ownership knows this. Their phones have been lighting up with texts from veterans, quiet conversations with captains, and blunt assessments from analytics staff who see the same thing. The team's competitive window isn't just open, it's narrowing. Myles Garrett is in his prime. The defense is historically stout. The roster is engineered for now, not someday. That's why this decision looms so large. Naming Sanders the unquestioned starter isn't just about addressing poor quarterback play. It's about signaling to every player, coach, and fan that winning will no longer be sacrificed for hierarchy, draft position, or coaching pride. And yet there is risk. If Sanders starts and struggles, critics will attack the organization for caving to pressure. If he succeeds, the Browns must build a coaching staff tailored to his skill set, his tempo, his ability to improvise and diagnose coverages pre-snap. That requires commitment, full structural commitment, not temporary experimentation. No more development timelines. No more manufactured quarterback battles. No more overprotective loyalty to underperforming veterans. This moment requires courage, because the worst decision Cleveland could make now is to retreat back into the uncertainty that defined last season's collapse. The locker room has spoken clearly. The fan base even louder. And the league is watching, waiting to see if the Browns will finally step forward instead of sideways. The true pressure isn't on Sanders, it's on the front office. Will they choose boldness or fear, vision or comfort, momentum or regression? Cleveland has seen what hesitation brings: divisions in the locker room, resentment among veterans, national ridicule, and winnable games squandered. The longer the organization delays, the more trust erodes and the more fractures deepen. But choosing Sanders, and choosing him decisively, opens a different path, one defined by clarity, confidence, and alignment. One where the franchise finally rallies around a leader capable of transforming not just games, but culture. The franchise's future hinges on a single call. A call that must be made now. A call that will echo through every season that follows.
If you enjoyed today's breakdown and want to keep up with all the drama, trades, and behind-the-scenes action in the NFL, then don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps this channel grow and lets us know you love this kind of content. And hey, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with your friends, your group chats, or anyone who loves football as much as you do. The more the conversation spreads, the better it gets. Most importantly, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss when we drop fresh stories, wild rumors, or breaking updates that the mainstream media won't talk about.